Hello, my name is Daniel. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy real, heartbreaking cheating stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. It really means a lot to me. This is a story that's been haunting me ever since I read it because it isn't just about betrayal, it's about the slow, heavy grief of losing someone you thought you knew, not because they died, but because they changed into someone unrecognizable. It begins with a man named Caleb, 33 years old, who lived in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. Caleb had a best friend named Darren, 35, someone he had trusted for over a decade. They weren't just friends, they were like brothers, sharing rent, late-night conversations, and years of memories that bound them tightly together. But that bond fractured when Caleb discovered something he couldn't ignore. Darren had been helping a 25-year-old woman named Rachel cheat on the father of her 1-year-old daughter. For Caleb, the wound cut deeper than he expected. His own childhood had been ripped apart by cheating. He remembered the day his parents' marriage disintegrated, the shouts, the slammed doors, the hollow silence afterward. Cheating wasn't just a mistake in his eyes, it was poison. And now the person he trusted most was carrying that same poison right into his home. Darren rented a room in Caleb's small townhouse. At first, Caleb tried to convince himself he could tolerate it, but every interaction felt tainted. He admitted, painfully, that he needed a buzz from alcohol just to sit in the same room with Darren, just to pretend things were normal. "It's probably overkill," he wrote, "but that's how much I hate cheating and how much I can't stand anyone who enables it." He kept asking himself if there was anything worth salvaging. Could they patch the friendship? Did he even want to? The uncertainty gnawed at him. When Caleb posted online for advice, the responses came fast. Some comments were sharp, saying, "Cut him off. People like that see cheating as normal. Next, he'll be hitting on your girlfriend or your wife." Others tried to offer a softer perspective, suggesting maybe Caleb was too wrapped up in a situation that wasn't entirely his responsibility. But Caleb knew what he saw, and he couldn't unsee it. The truth spilled out in bits and pieces. Darren had pursued Rachel while she was still in her relationship. He'd brought her into Caleb's home, into the very walls where Caleb had set clear boundaries, begging him not to turn his house into a secret hideaway for their affair. Darren ignored him. By this point, Caleb and Darren had lived together for 5 years. Their lives were tangled in everything from shared bills to holiday traditions. Darren had been his brother in all but blood, and now every memory felt like it had been built on a lie. By November came, Caleb tried to reason with Darren, to get him to see how wrong this was. But Darren only deflected, made excuses, shifted blame. Then on the first anniversary of Caleb's father's death, a day already thick with grief, Darren snapped at him, cruel and dismissive. That was the breaking point. Caleb asked him to leave. He packed up Darren's things, felt his chest tighten as the door finally closed, leaving the house hollow and too quiet. While it hurt to cut off a friendship that had lasted as long as ours, Caleb wrote, "Ultimately, I think it's for the best." It's been 26 days since his last drink. Caleb said he's feeling stronger now inch by inch. He's begun to notice the friends who were quietly supporting him all along, people who never crossed the lines Darren did. He realized they were better friends than Darren ever was. And even though the pain still lingers, there's something freeing in the silence Darren left behind. Caleb had been feeling more grounded with every passing day, almost as if the fog was finally lifting from his life. He'd stopped numbing himself with alcohol, 26 days without a drink, and instead began leaning on the people he never realized had been there for him all along. Friends he had overlooked in the shadow of Darren's presence quietly reached out, offering small acts of kindness that cut through the heaviness. A text checking in, a coffee left on his doorstep, a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he felt when he first shut the door on Darren for the last time. He admitted that at first he drank just to cope with the hollowness Darren left behind, but quitting forced him to sit with the pain instead of drowning it, and that was when he realized how much clearer things had become. Once Darren was gone, the house felt eerily quiet, but the quiet carried a strange sense of relief. There were no whispers of betrayal seeping through the walls, no tension lurking in every shared space. Caleb was learning that sometimes separation, even when it tears you open, is what allows you to see who really belongs in your life. Thinking about Darren stirred up memories of other people Caleb had met who wore masks of decency, only to peel them off at the worst times. He remembered his first job, when he was 20 and naive, still thinking everyone had good intentions. There was an older coworker, he must have been 8 years older, who seemed harmless at first, even helpful. They'd talk during lunch breaks, and Caleb thought he had found a mentor. But slowly, that illusion cracked. He saw how the man behaved around women, how his flirting wasn't harmless, how he went out of his way to insert himself into their lives under the guise of being helpful. A broken chair that needed moving, a shelf that needed installing, he'd be there, smiling, always a little too eager. Even if the women were in relationships, he didn't care. He blurred lines and acted as if boundaries were for someone else. The memory that stuck was one quiet afternoon when Caleb mentioned his very first girlfriend in passing, just sharing a story from years ago. The older man smiled, nodded, and said nothing, at least not then. Weeks later, Caleb found her on Facebook. 2 weeks after that, he was taking her out on a date. It was unsettling, almost predatory, and it left Caleb feeling creeped out in a way that stayed with him for years. These memories had been buried, but Darren's betrayal unearthed them. It all tied together. The charm that hides selfish motives, the quiet disregard for others' pain. It made Caleb realize how important it was to listen to that uneasy feeling in your chest when something feels wrong. But life didn't stop throwing heavy moments at him just because Darren was gone. Another story unfolded, one that weighed just as heavily. Caleb read a post online from someone who sounded exhausted in a way he understood too well. It was from a man whose 74-year-old father had trashed his apartment. He and his wife had gone away for 2 weeks, thinking a quiet vacation would be good for them. When they came back, the place didn't look like their home anymore. Fast food wrappers covered the living room floor. Dirty shirts, some of them not even the father's, were crumpled in the kitchen sink. The bathroom toilets were clogged. One window had been left open during a rainstorm, and rainwater had soaked the walls. Open jars of condiments sat sticky on the counters. Mold grew on food left out on the stove. Half-finished coffees, 12 of them, were scattered like forgotten thoughts across the apartment. Laundry lay in heaps on the floor, and somehow appliances that had worked fine before were now broken. The father wasn't senile, not exactly. He had always been messy, always a bit of a slob, but this crossed into something harsher, something that felt like deliberate disrespect. And it wasn't the first time. He ignored rules, dismissed boundaries, treated the apartment like it wasn't his son's home. Months earlier, he'd let friends use the place as a meeting spot. When one started pitching an MLM, the son told everyone to leave. He even called the cops, shouting in frustration when they hesitated to clear the place. His father was furious after, saying he'd been disrespected, embarrassed in front of his friends. Now, standing in the ruined apartment, the son wondered what respect even meant anymore. Caleb's wife Lena hesitated whenever the subject of his father came up. She reminded him that her father-in-law had given them money toward their wedding, and that made everything complicated. If something happened to him, I don't know if I could live with the guilt of asking him to leave, she said quietly. Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Caleb understood the sentiment, but it didn't make the situation any easier to bear. He couldn't ignore the way his father had treated their home, and yet the idea of sending him away carried its own weight. Caleb found himself thinking about the shows he'd watched in late nights when sleep wouldn't come, Hoarder SOS reruns, stories of clutter and chaos creeping into people's lives like vines. He remembered seeing older generations on those episodes, people who started with simple habits and eventually lost control. Sometimes the mess wasn't just laziness. Sometimes it was something deeper, something quietly stealing pieces of them. He couldn't shake the thought. Was this just his father being a lifelong slob? Or was something wrong? Leaving a window open during a storm, blocking toilets, breaking things and abandoning them halfway? It all felt off. Caleb's frustration simmered, but underneath it was fear, the kind he didn't want to name out loud. People online said the same thing over and over again. Get him checked for dementia. One comment stayed with him. People who have dementia often seem disrespectful at first. Their loved ones get angry because they think it's intentional. Then one day, you realize they weren't being careless. They were losing themselves. Caleb read another comment, blunt but true. How did he break that many appliances in 2 weeks? That's not just being sloppy. That's something else. Something you need to face before it's too late. Someone else mentioned their own grandfather, in his 80s, who had started washing shirts in the sink and abandoning them halfway. It was the first thing we noticed before the diagnosis, they wrote. It felt random, but it wasn't. The words cut into Caleb's thoughts. He pictured his father, sleeves rolled up at the kitchen sink, wet shirts crumpled in dirty water, like he'd started something but couldn't remember how to finish. And then another story came, like a wave of sadness layered on top of everything else. This one wasn't his, but it still lodged under his skin because it carried the same raw ache of someone watching a person they love unravel. A woman wrote about her husband, a 29-year-old man who'd just had his prized car destroyed. A truck driver had plowed into it, a hit and run. No license plate, no face to blame, just a ruined car and a ruined morning. Neighbors had seen it happen, but none of them had written down the plate number. Hours later, one of them casually mentioned it, too late to be useful. Her husband adored that car. He'd spent years working on it, every detail tuned, every dent fixed with patience and pride. And now it was gone. She tried to hold him through it, to calm him, as they talked to insurance companies and weighed what little hope there was for repairs. But his grief twisted into something sharp. His voice turned hard, frustration spilling out of him, and she felt it, not just in his words, but in the way he slammed doors and pushed past her without thinking. She read those words and understood too well how pain spreads like spilled ink, staining everything around it. The woman's words trembled as she wrote about her husband's anger spiraling out of control. His beloved car had been crushed, and the loss cracked something in him. But instead of just mourning the metal and paint, he turned his grief into something sharp and violent. She described how he yelled at her without pause, his voice so loud it filled all corners of their house. When she stood in his path, trying to stop the storm, he pushed her aside with more force than he probably realized, or maybe more than he wanted to admit. She reached for him, hoping to comfort him, brushing her fingers gently against his arm. Instead of softening, he slapped her hand away. It was a small movement, but it landed like a stone in her chest. She had never seen him like this, and that was the most frightening part. The man she loved, the man she had vowed to build a life with, looked at her like she was an obstacle, not a partner. She confessed that she was the kind of person who crumbles when someone raises their voice, and here she was, being yelled at by the one person she thought would protect her from pain like this. Commenters didn't hold back. Some might have thought it was too sensitive, but many saw the truth clearly. Abuse is abuse. One wrote, "You should leave. Just tell him you're afraid when he gets that angry. You should not have to be afraid of the person you're just starting a life with." Another voice said what others were afraid to. "If someone pushed me in a relationship, that's it. I'm gone." Yes, the car was destroyed. Yes, his frustration was understandable. But what happens the next time something else in life shatters? What happens when disappointment visits again, as it always does? A user named Ellie said, "Leave. Let him sit in this anger alone. Come back only if he's ready to treat you with respect. He hit you. He pushed you. That's aggression. It wasn't needed and it wasn't okay." Another, Diamond TTB, echoed the same warning. "Pack a bag. Leave. Visit someone safe. A car can be replaced. You can't. He is valuing his car more than you, and that is not okay. That's a red flag you can't ignore." The replies poured in like a wave, each one heavy and direct. Some pointed out that this marriage was less than 1 year old. Less than 1 year, and already there was violence. Already there was fear. "This isn't just about a car," one person wrote. "This is about how he handles life when it hurts. If this is how he treats you over something like this, what happens when it's worse?" It was a thought that lodged deep, the kind you can't just shake off. Another commenter was blunt. "If he pushed me because of a car, he'd be wrecked." They weren't joking. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, about making sure that love doesn't become a shield for abuse. Other voices urged counseling, but they also warned her not to return unless he acknowledged the harm and did the work to repair it. Not a half-hearted, "I'm sorry you felt that way" kind of apology. A real one that didn't shift blame, didn't excuse what he had done, didn't act like his grief made it acceptable to hurt her. One user wrote words that felt like an unflinching truth. "You are less than 1 year into this marriage, and he has already been abusive. 1,000 things can go wrong in life. Is this what every one of those moments will look like?" The advice cut through the noise like a cold wind. Find somewhere safe. Don't go back until you know you are safe. Because even the smallest crack in a foundation can bring the whole house down. The story shifted again, this time into something softer, though no less heavy in its own way. It came from a young woman named Ivy, just 20 years old, who carried an unusual ache for her 51-year-old father, Gregory. Gregory lived on the edge of Portland, working in a male-dominated trade where words were few and expectations were rigid. To the world, he was the picture of a man's man. He grilled on weekends, hunted deer in the fall, fixed his own roof in the rain, and swore he didn't need anyone's help. But Ivy had seen another side of him, one he kept quiet, almost hidden, like a secret he wasn't sure was safe to share. For years, Gregory had shown an interest in things the world didn't think belonged to him. He loved jewelry, not the simple kind, but pieces with colorful stones that shimmered like bottled light. Sometimes he would send Ivy links for earrings or pendants online, sighing as he typed that he had no one to buy them for. Other times he would stop mid-conversation to point out a dress in a shop window, his voice tinged with longing before he pulled it back, almost embarrassed. Ivy didn't think he was gay. She didn't think he wanted to transition. She didn't even want to make assumptions about what any of it meant. All she knew was that her dad liked pretty things, and he was sad that he couldn't have them. Gregory grew up mostly surrounded by women, his mother, his sister, but with a father and brother who were distant, critical men who didn't know how to sit in their own emotions, let alone allow anyone else to. He married Ivy's mother, had children, and carried that same quiet conflict in his chest for decades. Ivy wrote that she wanted to help him, but didn't know how. Should she encourage him to buy something he liked, or should she stay silent, afraid to crossing a line he hadn't yet dared to cross? Her only idea so far was to buy one of the pieces of jewelry he sent her, turn it into a keychain, and give it to him, something small enough to carry, but not bold enough to spark whispers. She wasn't even sure if it was her place to intervene, but her words held a tenderness that couldn't be ignored. The responses poured in, but they weren't cruel this time. They weren't harsh warnings or cutting truths. They were soft, like the jewelry Gregory admired. One commenter said what everyone seemed to be feeling. "You sound like such an amazing daughter. You're trying to help him be who he is, even when the world makes it hard. That's the kind of love we need more of." Reading the post, you could feel the conflict Gregory carried. You could imagine him sitting in his truck after work, scrolling through pictures of rings and necklaces on his phone, wanting them, but feeling trapped by the weight of what people would think. There was sadness in that. The storyteller admitted to being fascinated by stone jewelry too, opal rings, silver chains, but could step into a store and admire them without being judged. Gregory couldn't. The world had decided for him what he was allowed to want. And that's what made the story sting, because it shouldn't be that way. People shared their own ideas. One suggested, next time he says he wishes he had someone to buy a dress for, just ask him casually, why not buy it for yourself? He might laugh it off, but maybe it will open the door he's afraid to knock on. Another offered gentle encouragement, writing, "He's already told you what he likes. He trusts you. He's letting you see something vulnerable. That means you can help him feel like it's not such a big deal." Underneath it all was the same truth. Gregory just wanted permission to be himself, and he couldn't quite give it to himself yet. Gregory wasn't quite ready to take the plunge, not yet. Like so many of us, he seemed to be testing the waters first, gauging the reaction of someone he trusted before stepping fully into what he wanted. Ivy had become his sounding board, the one person he could mention these quiet, vulnerable thoughts to without feeling judged. People online reminded her that little affirmations, small nods of acceptance, might ease his anxiety, might help him feel that wanting these things wasn't shameful. Some comments brimmed with kindness. One user called Small Floral Prints said, "I love the keychain idea. Maybe you could even make something larger, like a brooch or a rearview mirror charm, so he can keep it near him without worrying about wearing it." Others added gentle, almost playful suggestions meant to open doors. A Plasticine Smile wrote, "Show him comedians like Eddie Izzard. His humor is brilliant, and he's open about being a straight man who loves skirts and makeup. Sometimes seeing someone else do it unapologetically cracks something open inside." The comment went on, suggesting that maybe, come Halloween, Ivy could convince her dad to dress as a female character, framing it as just a costume. "It sounds silly," the commenter said, "but I've read so many stories of people who dressed differently for a laugh and realized how right it felt. Maybe it could be a first step." Someone else chimed in with an idea about kilts. A kilt is still considered masculine, but it might be a safe, acceptable bridge. The thread filled with people tossing out possibilities. One suggested buying him a jewelry-making kit, not a childish one, but a serious set with tools and materials, so Gregory could create something for himself with his own hands. Sometimes making the thing you want feels less risky than buying it, they wrote. Others spoke about social media, about inspiration hidden in corners of the internet. Is he on Instagram? One asked. There are so many men there experimenting with style, some flamboyant, some subtle. Maybe if he sees them, he'll realize there's more room than he thinks. Reading through it all, Ivy's hope felt fragile, but present. This story was different from the ones that had come before. It wasn't about betrayal or broken trust or someone shoving another person out of the way in anger. It was about someone wanting to be more fully themselves, and how hard that can be when the world has already decided what box you're supposed to fit in. But there was sadness here too. Sadness that Gregory, at 51, still carried this weight, still felt like he had to ask permission to enjoy something as simple as a piece of jewelry. Ivy wanted to believe that one day he might walk into a store and buy the necklace he liked, or the ring he'd sent her a picture of at midnight, and do it without shame. She wanted to believe that he'd wear it, or hang it from his truck mirror and not flinch at what anyone thought. The conversation drifted into softer reflections. Someone noted how rare it was to see stories like this, stories about people quietly helping someone else step into themselves instead of tearing them down. And it was rare. Too often the stories were about destruction, about love turned cruel, about red flags flying. But this was different. And maybe that's why it stuck, because it wasn't about someone tearing Gregory apart. It was about whether he could find the courage to put himself together. Caleb sat in his quiet Portland townhouse, staring at the blank wall where a photo of him and Darren used to hang. That space felt like a reminder of all the cracks that had formed in his life, the friendships he'd lost, the trust that had splintered. He'd thought this home would always feel alive, filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, even Darren's terrible jokes. But now silence was the only thing that stayed. He found himself trying to build new routines, picking up the pieces where he could. He wanted to create something good out of all the damage, helping others, connecting, finding meaning in small ways. He talked about new plans with a shaky hope, like setting up projects and sharing pieces of himself again. But even that felt fragile. Every time Caleb spoke about rebuilding, there was this quiet tremor underneath, an awareness that healing wasn't neat, and moving forward didn't erase what had happened. He carried that weight with him, even as he tried to smile for the people who still showed up for him. And when he said thank you could hear it. Gratitude mixed with sadness, the voice of someone who'd been broken, but still wanted to believe that some pieces of life are worth salvaging. Stories like Caleb's mirror what so many of us face today, the slow, aching process of realizing that people we love can also hurt us deeply. His choices, hard as they were, offer lessons we can carry. If you're in a relationship or friendship that feels toxic, don't ignore the signs. Set clear boundaries, and don't be afraid to enforce them, even if it feels painful. Healing starts when you stop excusing the harm. Seek support from friends, from a counselor, or even anonymous communities online, because you don't have to do it alone. And remember, rebuilding after heartbreak isn't about rushing to forget. It's about taking slow, steady steps, honoring the pain, while making room for something better.